I originally wrote this sermon a couple of years ago. For those of you who haven't caught on, the last year, a lot of those sermons have been repeats. I've used sermons that I have written previously. And I wrote this sermon in 2017, and it was a response to tragedy. I was actually in the middle of a sermon series on the book of Judges, and I had to stop that sermon series because something so horrible had happened. Do you guys remember the Las Vegas shooting? Right, a gunman. I think he was like in a hotel, and he was shooting at like a country music concert or something, and he killed over 50 people and wounded like over 100 more. And it was just a horrible thing. You kind of get used to those, but that happened. And then 2 days later, that was a Tuesday, I think. And then 2 days later, a young man in our school system committed suicide. His name was Justin, and it was a small town, and everybody knew everybody. There was one high school, and it was hard. It was really heavy. And for some reason, that suicide hit me a little bit deeper than some of the other stories that I had heard in the news. You see, Justin's mom, her name was Jessica, and she ran a fantastic daycare out of her home. But my son was in the house when they discovered the body. And now he didn't see anything. The daycare's in a whole different section of the house, but we got that phone call where they said, you got to come get your kid. Something happened. And we get there, and there's ambulances and fire police, and it was just, for some reason, that story hit me just a little bit harder than other stories that I've heard. And then this past week, you see these stories like, did you guys see that story about, I think his name was Oscar, and the little girl, and he tried to swim across the Rio, and he didn't make it, and he ended up washed up face down on the American shores. And that photo was really haunting and graphic. It was, and in those moments when one tragedy piles on top of another tragedy, it all becomes a little bit too much. We've become pretty numb, right? Pretty callous to the news. We almost expect terrible things from our world, but when it comes so much, so fast, we become overwhelmed, and we're filled with questions. And it's not just the children asking questions, is it? We have questions in our hearts. What is this? Why did this happen? God, how could you let this happen? Where were you? And we don't know the answers to the kids' question because we don't know the answers to our own questions, and that leaves us feeling helpless and overwhelmed and frustrated, and it leads to bitter feelings and sometimes even anger. Today, I want to tell you the story of Hosea. Now, I'll warn you, Hosea is a very strange book in the Old Testament. And I apologize, some of the content is a little inappropriate, but we're going to push through. Hosea is a very strange book in the Bible. You see, Hosea was a prophet in Israel way back in the Old Testament. He was God's messenger to the people. So God would come to Hosea and tell him things, and then Hosea would share that with the people, usually to warn them about something bad that was coming. But with Hosea's life, God did something a little unusual. He said, here's the deal. Your life, your relationship is going to mirror my relationship with the world. Your life is going to be a metaphor for my connection to the world. Your family is going to be a symbol for how I connect to the people of the world. You're going to get married. You're going to have kids. And all of that is going to reflect and represent God and his people. Okay? So then God tells Hosea, all right, go marry a prostitute. Yeah, a woman named Gomer. Hosea is like God. And the woman is like the people of the world who are unfaithful to God. You understand the metaphor that the message God's trying to say. The people are unfaithful. He says, go marry a prostitute and then try to get her to quit her day job. Now already, this seems like a really bad idea, right? This is not a healthy relationship from the very beginning, but this is a very dysfunctional family. Hosea, the prophet, right? He's the man of God, and then you've got Gomer over here, the prostitute. But it gets worse. Hosea and Gomer have 3 kids. And Hosea gives those kids the worst names you can possibly imagine. The first child that Hosea and Gomer have together is a little boy, and he names him Jezreel. Now, Jezreel is the name of a place where a horrible disaster happened in Israel's history. So it's kind of like trying to name your kid Hiroshima, right? Or name your kid Chernobyl or something, right? Like, come here, little Chernobyl, come on, Ugh, and if I'm Gomer, I'd be furious with Hosea. You named my kid what? You named her after this horrible thing that happened in our history? I don't want to call my kid that. I'd be furious. I mean, in my life, when we had our first son, we named him William after my grandfather, and we call him Liam. But I can't imagine what would happen if I approached my wife, Sarah, and I said, hey, how about, hear me out, how about we name our first kid Epic Disaster? Yeah? No? So then Hosea's second child comes, and it's a little girl, and he calls her Lo Ruhama, which means you are not loved. And that one's not exactly funny, is it? I feel like we kind of crossed a line there, right? And then they have another kid, a second son this time, and they name that one Lo Ami, which means you are not my people. That's chapter 1 to the book of Hosea. It's this really weird setup, kind of a strange metaphor/reality story. Hosea, your life will represent, it's going to be like a metaphor, like a symbol for me and my people. And at the end of chapter 1, God says, one day we will change the names of the children. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So then we fast forward from chapter 1 all the way up to chapter 11 in our scripture lesson for today. Now the rest of the book of Hosea is really unpleasant, right? It's very fire and brimstone judgment stuff. It talks about wickedness, and people being unfaithful and people being untrustworthy. It talks about punishment and all the bad things that are going to happen, consequences for action, stuff like that. And then we get to chapter 11, and the metaphor shifts. Okay, because it was a husband and a wife relationship. That was the metaphor for God and his people. But in chapter 11, it shifts from a parent-child relationship. Okay, so now it's God is the father, Israel, his people, are the son. Okay, following me on that? Right, the metaphor has shifted. All right, in chapter 11, so chapter 11, verse 1, it says, when Israel was a child, I loved him. And I called my son out of Egypt, and the more I called to him, the farther he moved from me, offering sacrifices to the images of Baal and burning incense to idols. Does that sound kind of familiar? Not the sacrifices and idols thing, but that other part where he said, the more I called to my son, the farther he moved away from me. Have you ever had an experience like that? I know a lot of people, they got brothers or family or kids or grandkids. The more you try to reach out to them, the more you try to love them and keep them from doing bad things, the farther they run away from you. This is God in Israel. This is that connection. God says, the more I called to him, the farther he moved from me. And it keeps going in verse 3, and it says, I myself taught Israel how to walk, leading him along by the hand, but he doesn't know or even care that it was I who took care of him. I led Israel along with my ropes of kindness and love. I lifted the yoke from his neck. I myself stooped to feed him. I don't know what it was, but the first time I ever read those verses, they just hit me in a way I've never experienced before. I read them over and over and over. I never really thought about God that way. I mean, sure, we say that God is our Father, right? We talk about that. We say our Father every time we do the Lord's Prayer. But I never thought about God as a parent, God teaching a child how to walk, right? It says, leading him by the hands. And the Hebrew text has this image of putting your hands underneath someone's arm to support them while they walk. You know how you teach a kid to walk, right? When they're little and they got those little hands and they grab onto your finger and you just kind of lead them along. This is the image of this verse. And I never thought about God that way. God as a father. And remember the metaphor. We are the child. God is the father. Listen to verse 3 again. I myself taught Israel how to walk, leading him along by the hand, but he doesn't know or even care that it was I who took care of him. God teaches us how to walk. We are the child of God. God is the father. But then the tone shifts in verse 5 through 7. And he says, but since my people refuse to return to me, they will return to Egypt. They will be forced to serve Assyria. War will swirl through their cities. Their enemies will crash through their gates. They will destroy them, trapping them in their own evil plans. For my people are determined to desert me. They call me the Most High, but they don't truly honor me. Yeah, what he's talking about is this actually happens in history to Israel. The Assyrian Empire comes in because of Israel's mistake. They did some dumb thing they weren't supposed to do. They ticked off the big empire. So the empire comes in and crushes and destroys Israel. We all make mistakes, but when we make mistakes, there are consequences. And as the parent, as the father, God has this frustration, right? His children are leaving him. They're not listening. They're abandoning all the things that he taught them. They're not listening. They're not obeying. We are not listening. We are not obeying the Lord. And he knows that it's going to hurt us later. He knows the consequences. He knows what's coming down the line. He sees the consequences of our lives coming back to hurt us. He says, my people are determined to desert me. They call me the Most High, but they don't truly honor me. Do you feel that like parental frustration? Now he's got like a teenage kid, right? And kid's driving him crazy. The anger that's going on. But I want you to hear the pain of verse 7. And so let me set the stage a little bit. Imagine the parent of a toddler after one of those nightmare days. You know the days I'm talking about? Where the kids are just being horrible, right? They're just infuriating. They don't listen. They don't obey. They're not trying to learn. They're not even trying to be good. They're just cranky, and they're screaming, and they're being selfish and obnoxious little monsters determined to drive their parents insane. And the parents are hanging on by the last thread, but it's the last one, right? They're keeping it together because they want other parents to think that they've got it together, but they don't. Yeah, we've experienced this maybe, right? We know what this is. We don't want other people to think we're crazy, but we need to snap, right? And we're just there. And it's been a long day. It's been a long, frustrating day, but finally, the kid's asleep. The end of the day. And no matter how horrible they were, you look, as a parent, you look down in that crib, and you look at that little face. Something happens to their face when they sleep, doesn't it? Right? You're looking at them, and no matter, that face that was like beet red and screaming and snotty and angry like an hour ago, it's like transformed, and you're looking at this little angel sitting in the crib. And you're the one who was screaming earlier, Amos is back there. He's passed out now. He was making all that noise earlier in the service, and there he is, sleeping right there. And you're standing over the crib, looking at the child, and this is where I hear verse 8. This is God. He says, oh, how can I give you up, Israel? How can I let you go? How can I destroy you like Admah or demolish you like Zeboim? My heart is torn within me and my compassion overflows. No, I will not unleash my fierce anger. I will not completely destroy Israel, for I am God and not a mere mortal. I am the Holy One living among you, and I will not come to destroy. There is a God out there who has every right to destroy us. For all the mess we've made to just wipe us off the face of the earth, for all the pain that we have caused, for all the hurt that we have created in our life, in our world. And he looks at us and he says, how can I give you up? How can I let you go? My heart is torn within me. Do you see who God is in these verses? Do you see the character of God in that moment of pain? God chooses forgiveness. God chooses hope and love instead of giving up on us. God never gives up on us. God, our Father, stays with us. And then the last two verses, they kind of turn to the distant future. It says in verse 10, it says, for someday the people will follow me, and I, the Lord, will roar like a lion. And when I roar, my people will return from the west. Like a flock of birds, they will come from Egypt. Trembling like doves, they will return from Assyria. And I will bring them home again. So we have this victory, this tone of power and might. And to be honest, it's a little scary when we start to see God's power, right? Particularly in the Old Testament. It's intense. Anybody a fan of C.S. Lewis here? Anybody know The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, you guys? You remember the character Aslan, right? The lion? This is where he gets it from, right? C.S. Lewis knows his minor prophets, right? There's a picture of God just roaring like a lion. If you don't know C.S. Lewis, anybody seen The Lion King? Right? Lion King, we know that one. Okay. After all the pain at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, but come on, it's been out 25 years. At the end of the movie, after the pain and the darkness and the desolation and that purging fire and the big fight with his uncle, right? And Simba's there and it's raining. And it's dark and it's miserable. And Simba, our hero, he's finally claimed his authority as the king, and he's climbing up Pride Rock, and he gets to the top and he just roars. And I think maybe at the beginning he's just crying out in pain and sadness at this desolation that's in front of him, all the terrible things that have happened. He's just so... But then the other lions start roaring with him. And life comes back into the valley, and it turns into a roar of victory. God calls his people, and they come home. Literally, in history, this happened. Assyria, the empire, comes in, crushes Israel for a little while, for a generation or so, and then God comes in, and he sets them free. He brings them home. And so you got all these metaphors and images in the prophet, but it's all connected to the real world. All connected to the story of Hosea. So let's go back to Hosea. Hosea married a prostitute, Gomer, because a prostitute abandons her husband just like the people of God abandoned God. And it's a terrible idea, right? I mean, why would God bother with human beings who he knows are going to hurt him? Why, if God is so powerful, why does he keep giving us free will to do these terrible things? Why doesn't he just come in and force us to be good, force the world to be perfect? Why would a man give a prostitute a chance? Someone you know is going to be unfaithful. Why would we do that? Why would we pour hope into a hopeless situation? Do you remember Hosea, what Hosea named his kids? Disaster, you are not loved, and you are not, you're not my people. Because the children of this weird, dysfunctional family, they're going to be disasters who feel like they are not loved and they feel like they don't belong. The reality of this situation is a mess, not just in Hosea's real life, but in God's connection to the people. It's a dysfunctional mess of a family. But at the end of chapter 1, God changes the picture. He literally changes their name. Listen to this. They rename Hosea's children. At the end of chapter 1, it says, "Yet there will be a time when Israel's people will be like the sands of the seashore, too many to count. And then at the place where they were told, 'You are not my people,' it will be said, 'You are children of the living God.'" At the place where you were told, where you were called, "You are not my people, you are not loved, you are a disaster," at that place, it will be said, "You are children of the living God." But here's the reality. There's going to be times in your life when you feel like the child of a broken relationship in your walk with God. You will feel like a disaster. You will feel like you are not loved. You will feel like you do not belong. But when God roars like a lion out of the dysfunction, God brings redemption. And so we have this dysfunctional family mess, and God turns it into dysfunctional family love. It's still dysfunctional. This world is pretty messed up. But with God, we catch that glimpse of hope. The good news this morning is that God parents us. God's action in the world, God's love for us. This is not some far-off judge or some parent, like some father who doesn't really care about his children. God parents us. He guides us, teaches us, despairs us when we turn from what he shows us. He watches in pain and anguish when we walk away from him. We cause problems and we reap destruction on ourselves. And then God steps in roaring like a lion to bring us home. God loves you. And that love is the love of every father and mother that ever lived, but even better. Such parental love is creative. It brought you into this world. Such love is instructive. It teaches children how to grow and become a better person. Such love is tolerant and patient. It allows for mistakes. It accepts children in forgiveness. Such love is corrective. It intervenes when a child is strayed too far. But most importantly, such love is healing. It can bring us back to wholeness. God parents us. Now here's the important part. Now, you heard the passion and pain and anger and love and hope that comes from the way that God parents us with the story of Hosea. You saw that. Now, if that is real, if God is our Father, if God parents us, what does that make you? A child of God. Our response to the character of God revealed in the story of Hosea is to claim our identity as children of God. I am a child of God. You are a child of God. We are children of God, beloved by the Creator who is rooting for us. Remember Hosea's children. At the place where you were told you do not belong, it will be said, "You are children of the living God." This is our identity. This is our hope. This is our reassurance. I am a child of God. Will you say that with me? I am a child of God. Again, I am a child of God. One more time, I want to hear it. I am a child of God. Good. God is your father. God is your mother. God is the ultimate parent, teaching, guiding, rooting for you, supporting you. God sits next to you, puts his arm around you every time you are hurting. God jumps up and down with glee every time you celebrate a big success. God cries bitter tears when you lose something, when you hurt. God challenges you. God encourages you when you're feeling depressed or out of place or abandoned. God is always there for you, more than any other human being ever could be. God is there for you. God parents you. You are a child of God. Teenagers, this part's for you. Adults, you can listen to. I just have one question. Where does your value come from? What makes you valuable to the world? Now, I took this from a guy named Bob Lenz, who wrote a book called Dignity Revolution. And his whole ministry is giving dignity to our teenagers. It was good news back then. It's good news now. And so it's going to seem a little familiar to something we did back in October. Where does your value come from? All right, you are not valuable because of your boyfriend. You are not valuable because of your grades. You are not valuable because of your sports teams or your friends or your Instagram following. You are not valuable because of something on the outside. You are valuable because of something on the inside. This is a $10 bill. I wanted to use a $100 bill, but I couldn't find one, so we'll just pretend, right? This is a $100 bill. Let's say that, right? Let me ask you, is this valuable? Right? Would you like a $10 bill? All right. All right. What about now? It's still okay, but I crumpled it up, right? Isn't it less valuable now? Is it like worth $9 now? Right? You would still use this? All right, well, what if I'm going to come over here and mess with these teenagers, okay? Is this $10 interesting to you? Yeah? Okay, but what if I put it on the ground and I step on it? Is there still value there? What? All right, I got to get more creative. Okay. What if I tell you that it's worthless? This is worthless. Does that make it worthless? No? Okay, what if I break up with it? All right? Dumped. What if I give it an F? Right? What if I give it a bad grade? What if I don't let it into the college that the $10 bill really wanted to go to? What if I cut it from the sports team? Would you still want this $10 bill? What if I say it's worthless? Like I spend a lot of time. You are worthless. You are pathetic. You are worthless. Did I just make it less valuable? Okay, this is frustrating. What if I tell you that it's garbage, that it's not loved? What if I put it in a home where there's only one parent, or I give it an addiction to drugs or struggles with alcohol? Does that make it less valuable? What if I tell you that this $10 bill sometimes awkward, doesn't know how to talk about their feelings, and sometimes they get depressed? What if I tell you trying to think of what I could tell you. What if I tell you that it's lonely and it doesn't know how to talk to people and it's all by itself? Would you still want this $10 bill? Does this $10 still have value? Does this child still have value? I can't hear you. Does this child still have value? I don't believe you. I'm not treating it well. Ah. You are not valuable because of something on the outside. Nothing that happens in this world can change your value. You are valuable because of something in here. Because there's a creator who made you and loves you. You are a child of God. You are valuable because of something on the inside. For every mistake, for every abnormality, for every awkward, weird piece, for every loneliness, for every heartbreak, there is a God who reaches out to you in verse 8. How can I give you up? How can I let you go? My heart is torn within me, and my compassion overflows. Remember where your value comes from. It's not out here. Cling to a God who understands. I'm not going to get up here and tell you that everything's going to be all right. I'm not going to say it's all part of God's plan, and if you love him and trust him, then everything's going to work out exactly how you want it to, because I don't know that. Because that's not how it works. I don't know how God is going to turn around this twisted world, but I read this text, I read this story, and I see a God, a loving parent who will not give up on his children. I see a God who will one day roar like a lion, and we will come home again. There is hope. Even on the darkest day, there is hope. Sometimes I think when horrible things happen in our world and we rage and we cry out and we ask a lot of questions, but the truth is, answers won't make us feel better. Because answers aren't going to bring Justin back or Oscar and his little girl. The answers are not really what we want. In those moments when tragedy strikes, we feel like kids again. We feel helpless and weak and afraid, and we hate that. And so what we want are not answers. We want a parent. We want someone that we can trust, someone we can lean on. We need to turn to our Father, to lean on his strong arms when we cannot stand any longer. And so I'll leave you with this. May you turn to your God and ask him to carry the burden when you are not ready to lift it yet. May you remember that your value does not come from this. It comes from this. And may you wait to hear the roar of a God who will call us home to redemption. Amen.